There we go. So thank you very much for coming today. It's great to see so many faces and from all around the world as well. It's really good. And I have to say, I think that might be, Fred, that might be down to you as well. I know that certainly picking up on Twitter, quite a few people have picked up on the event. So thank you very much for coming today. This is the second event that we've run that's looking at the futures of design education. And as I said at the first event, we're doing this to try to elicit different perspectives, different positions, different people's take on what other futures of design education might be, or even what other presents, if you like. Presents, that's a terrible word. You know, what we're already doing, but we don't hear about in terms of design education. We're very keen to make these more visible because we all know that there's a lot more going on than ever gets represented or even talked about properly. So that's why we've got the little S in the futures of design education. Now, the last time it was just a bit of an open session. We had an idea that it might be quite interesting to do something. We didn't have an idea of format, so we tried a couple of speakers, and I think we had a bit of a collective discussion afterwards. We thought that it worked quite well, so we thought we'd repeat that for another couple of sessions. So today, we're really lucky to be joined by two really interesting speakers, Frederick Van Impe and Nicos Souleles. Nicos, I'm so sorry if I mispronounce your second name. I'll give you a chance to correct it later on. My deepest apologies. Cool, that's good. I won't try it again. Now, next time we've also got a couple of other speakers lined up. We're hoping to have Kenelwe Munaye, who's from South Africa, and also possibly Liv Maret Nielsen and Ingvild de Granis from PedSIG itself to talk about early years education. And Kenelwe was going to talk about design thinking in a South African context in the next session. Now, we've got a date penciled in, but we haven't confirmed it with everybody yet. But that date is the 14th of January. So if you pencil that one in just now, or if you want to be added to an email list, then stick your email in the text chat and I'll send around an invitation to everybody as well, if that's easier for you. Apart from that, I don't think there's anything else that we need to do in terms of sort of administration. Anybody else from PedSIG want to say anything? Leslie Ann, Naz, Nicole, are we all good? How are you doing, Naz? How's things? Cool. Okay, in that case, I think we'll kick off with the first speaker. As I say, it'll be the same format as the last time, a very short sort of talk, a provocation, or just an idea. And we've got two really perfect people for this sort of thing. Frederick Van Impe, who's Assistant Professor in Industrial Design at UTFPR in Brazil. I won't go into detail about what that is. Fred, I'll let you sort of introduce yourself. And I'm hoping that Fred might be talking a bit about the anthropophagic studio. Or have you got something else lined up?
Yes, thank you, Derek. Thank you, Leslie Ann. Thank you, everybody from PedSIG. I'm speaking from here. Let me see. This is south of Brazil, Curitiba. And let me see if I can share my screen. I think you need to make me a co-host for that. All right. So it's great to be here and speak from such a different perspective, the Global South perspective on the futures of design education. So that's what I'm gonna talk a little bit and provoke some nice conversations with you, hopefully. There's a lot of discussion nowadays in design academic conferences and papers about the future of design education. It's kind of a grandiose vision that sometimes would make the whole world the design studio. So breaking out of the design studio and dealing with the problems of the whole world and going out of the university and reaching out for the many parts of society that hasn't yet been involved with design education. And while doing so, the design métier, the business, the work of design becomes more abstract. So instead of dealing with things, physical things, you deal with relations, the design material, especially social relations that you can design. And ultimately, the goal of this future, the grandiose future of design education, is to design systems, socio-technical systems, and very complex adaptive systems. Well, this kind of vision of a single future for design education, for whatever, for society, has been used as an ideology in the global south for many centuries and legitimized colonization, neo-colonization and imperialism. And here's, I just take an example from Brazil, where I speak from. We have this design school which was opened in the 60s called PedSIG, which was basically mimicking the model of education from Germany. And a lot of professors came to teach over here. And this was a kind of part of a modernization process in Brazil, but definitely reproduces some new colonial relationships. And this was not only Brazil, the same happened in India. So there is this National Institute of Design, which is quite similar to PedSIG. And we have written somehow about this ideology of the future. However, I want to focus over here on something else, which is the counter project of ideology of the future, the globalization project of the South, which wants to make room for many futures, many worlds, many studios, all connected to solidarity practices. This has been discussed by recent scholars like Arturo Escobar, Boaventura de Souza Santos, and also earlier scholars like Newton Santos. Inspired by this globalization project of the South, we have been developing here in Brazil the Anthropophagic Studio, which is the topic of the paper I suggested for reading and discussing today, if anyone wants to join that. This is an attempt to localize the design studio methodology, especially in the interaction design field here in Brazil, with cultural specifics, the notion of cultural cannibalism, of incorporating foreign ideas into the tribe by digesting foreign concepts and delivering some acid criticism and relating to our traditions instead of just importing things ready-made to our culture. So here you see a mix of different theater of the oppressed, pedagogy of the oppressed, hacking, gambiarra, and all kinds of different things happening at this anthropophagic studio. And one thing that I want to highlight and share with you is the digital version of this anthropophagic studio, which is called Kodai's platform. This platform was developed back in 2011 as an outreach activity for the Faber-Ludens Institute, where we started the anthropophagic studio. And it has all kinds of online collaborative tools based on open source software and Creative Commons that really helps any kind of community to create their own design studio. And they also supported by some wiki style knowledge base that has some abstracted knowledge, all kinds of different methods and techniques that they can use in their own fields. They don't need to be in a design field to make use of this knowledge. They have some kind of social networking stuff and multiple toolkits, not just one, because it's all open design, so it can copy, modify, and change into what is relevant to them. So we have been hosting more than 700 projects from social movements, indigenous communities, popular educators all around Brazil and other Latin American countries. And reflecting on this experience, I would say it's very nice that your PedSIG initiative is called Futures of Design Education, the plural, because really affords this kind of a pluriversal approach that is in tune with the Global South interests. And speaking of which, the Global South initiatives, they really emphasize that futures should be locally grounded and politically engaged to counter this Global North the future program that Tony Fry has written about, these approaches for industry, for capitalist markets that really erases and cancels the futures, and especially the futures of the Global South. So these are the references, and I'm gonna copy the PDF link in the chat, so if anyone wants to check the references. So thank you very much.
Cool, Fred. Thank you so much for that. That was a whistle-stop tour. I've been really interested in And maybe we pick it up later if we could get a couple of links maybe to some of the resources. I've posted a link to Fred's work on the Anthropophagic Studio. It's well worth a read. Some really interesting stuff in there. I'd really like to have a look at the virtual sort of tools that you've been using as well, Fred, from a personal point of view. So I'll catch you later and we can maybe get some resources and links shared with people as well. Wow, okay, so we're not talking about a small subject here then this morning or this afternoon. Does anybody want to go first? Or if we can maybe focus on maybe questions to Fred on what he's specifically sort of presented on first, and then we can maybe open it out to more of a discussion. Britta, did you want to go ahead?
Yeah, actually, it was more in response to Fred, but directed at the Design Research Society, because it's been something I've been advocating for, to have more Creative Commons open source so that the research is available to Global South. Because a lot of the people that I work with in Indonesia can't access the DRS because of even the membership costs are very low. So I think that's really inspirational about the pluriversal movement and what I'm sort of experiencing of that this accessibility, which is being modeled. And I hope that maybe as the DRS, this discussion could sort of adapt some of that.
I could maybe comment on that. I'm Isabel. I don't have my camera on because it's about 7 a.m. here and I'm just drinking my morning coffee. But I'm the online editor for the DRS, and we do have an open access library that we're starting. It's called the Digital Library. We're just uploading basically all of the DRS materials we've ever had basically are going to be up there. And we're also going to use it as an opportunity to sort of host other, papers from conferences, journals. People can basically submit their materials to us, and we're going to be able to host them for free. And so maybe that's somewhat of a response. Cool.
Well, I would also say this would be well worth having a separate discussion about as well, Britta. I don't mean to sort of dismiss it or anything, but I wonder if we could maybe get back to Fred's stuff, but not. I think you're absolutely right, and I would 100% I agree with you on this. I wonder, Fred, would you be able to connect these two things? I mean, clearly, and I've seen it as well. I would agree with Britta that in a lot of the work that I've looked at, it's coming from alternative views of the future. Openness is such an important aspect to that. How does that wrap into the work? But also, Britta, I think we definitely need to pick this up at a future discussion because it's the paucity of being able to get access to high quality stuff is just it's becoming a crisis. I personally think. But that's just my personal view. Sorry, Fred. Does that make sense?
Well, I would say that open design is not enough. It's good. It's definitely useful for us, but more than that, we need to have some open process of participation. And that's why we translate open design as design livre, which is more close to free software than to open software. And while doing so, we emphasize the political and the possibility of participating in the process of developing these educational materials and all kinds of design projects, so that the students, they do so in a transparent public space where not just the end results can be seen through Creative Commons, but the whole process is documented through this online platform. And that's something a little bit different than just releasing the materials in a library, which is great. It's a great start, but we definitely need some collaborations between Global South and Global North in a much more, in a less divided way. So if you just say, I have this great resource for you guys, I'm just throwing these resources on your heads. Yeah. This is like previous colonial stuff, like people throwing technologies in Africa. It doesn't really make so much difference in the colonial relationship. So we have to engage into meaningful conversation like these ones for us to move forward to a more pluriversal education.
Mm-hmm. No, we definitely concur with that. It's actually quite an aggressively neoliberal view, Fred. And again, I'm coming from an open university in the sense that we know that just providing those materials is nowhere near enough. Like just opening your doors isn't enough, because it still means that a whole bunch of people who don't think they can take part still won't take part. So how do you encourage that in your curricula, in your approaches? Are there particular things that you do to not just be open, but to be more, I don't know, diffuse or permeable is another phrase I've heard used before?
I think it depends a lot on the kind of communities that are engaged with the design projects. If you are just designing from nowhere towards no one, nobody would like to join this kind of conversation because it's all of your mind. But if you are engaged with the community and then you open up things for participation, also for sharing materials, those nearby communities, they also get somehow indirectly engaged. And in the long run, we have larger and larger communities all connected through what they are sharing together. So it's all about designing within communities and not just outside of communities, outside them. It's like more like an inside out approach for design, I would say.
So basically, to connect those three things together, to be open means you need open participation. For open participation to be active, it has to be contextualized. Yeah, it can't be theorized or generalized or well, except at very, very abstract levels that might have no meaning, perhaps down at that level. Maybe that's a relevant thing that touches back to what you were talking about as well, Britta, that it's maybe not just a case of examining the politics or the structures of that, but how the whole processes of publication or openness work in that sense as well, maybe? Is that too abstract? Is that, have I gone too far again? I'm sorry.
Well, that is a question over here in the chat. Should I answer it?
Yeah,
now?
go for it. Absolutely, Fred.
And Nicole has a question as well.
Oh, sorry, cool.
So Nas is asking, how do you manage relations with the community? How does that reflect on design education? How do you see the implications of these relations in the future terms of design education? Well, currently, in the past, I used to take a more participatory design approach, really influenced by Scandinavian approaches. But then I discovered that Scandinavian came from critical pedagogy, that's pretty much from Brazil, the work of Paulo Freire. And Paulo Freire recommended a different kind of engagement with the communities, because participatory design was more like, we have this technical expertise we want to share with your community, so you make use of this technical expertise. However, Paulo Freire would say something different. He would say, you don't know something from that community don't know something from you, so you engage into a dialogue. And then through dialogue, you generate some action that is relevant to that community, so that it transforms the reality of that community. But it takes some time. So you first have to problematize the community surroundings and their culture. So they have to see something which is they want to change in that community. And then from this inside out movement, you reach out for doing some design projects. So that's participatory action research. That's how it's also known, this critical pedagogy part of engage with communities. And maybe Nicos has another question.
Hi. Yes, I do. Yeah,
Oh.
I did read your paper. I loved it. I found this idea of ingesting ideas really, yeah, very interesting. Could you compare this approach of, you know, ingestion and stirring up to maybe the more superficial approach that's been a culture and design for forever, you know, that you appropriate ideas, but at what point does it become just a superficial versus a much more in-depth, what you mean, digestion and, you know, turning it around? So I wonder if you can compare that a little bit, or yeah, just discuss that.
Well, if we extend a little bit further the metaphor, you can go to a fast food restaurant, eat very quickly, and not digest very well your food. And then you don't get the right nutritious, and you don't really feel satisfied because you didn't take enough time for chewing up and digesting, and also separating what is worth and what is not worthy to keep and to connect to your culture. And that's somehow, I could give an example from design education, the vernacular, the graphic design stuff that students are being somehow told to go to the streets, take some pictures of some vernacular forms of design, and then create a typography out of that. without any understanding of the cultural backgrounds and the origins of those visual forms, without even engaging with the creators. So they are basically stealing some design material from others and not providing enough credit. And I think this kind of what maybe you have thought about appropriation. There's definitely some good appropriation and bad appropriation, I would say, in terms of morality, in terms of cultural relationships.
Thank you.
Cool. So are there any other questions? I was going to slip in one here, Fridge, because this, I suppose, your last comment then raises the grand challenge or the big challenge. If that appropriation is almost completely supported in every other area of design, professional design, in terms of markets, in terms of professionalization, in terms of how we go about most of our business, 90% of it, how do you shift from one massive mode to another mode? One of the issues I do kind of have is how we are almost devolving responsibility, a lot of responsibility to our students. And not everybody is, but it's almost in the sense that we've realized that design needs to change in a way. And it's not going to be us who are going to carry out that change. We're almost giving that response or forcing that response. It's almost like sustainability as well. We're saying, like, we screwed up. We've got no solution to the problem. Bye. How do you offer that to students? How do you give that to students in a way that's a bit more positive rather than dumping a whole bunch of stuff on them? And then how do you move that shift, or how do you start to make that transition?
I think that there are two aspects of this question. So mass education is something necessary in huge countries like Brazil. However, mass education can be much more different than traditional forms of education, because we have these interactive digital technologies right now that really allows us to engage into dialogue in a larger scale. For example, right now we are engaged into such kind of dialogue that wouldn't be possible with this kind of technologies available for us now. But these technologies can be designed in a way that they are mass customized, which is a little bit better, but they can also be designed as open infrastructures like Kodai's platform I mentioned in my slides. This platform can be copied, it can be transformed, altered, because everything is open source. And then you can also, this isn't possible yet, but I foresee one kind of a future where you have multiple anthropophagic studios all federated and connected through some kind of common shared API, data exchange, or some collaborative agreements that enables sharing what locally is being learned. And the second part of your question is more related to problematization, which I think it's essential for design education and not really well done, I would say. We ask students to define design problems, but once they have something which is we can evaluate through our design criteria, we just accept it. But maybe that design problem is not really a problem for a community where this design project is being headed at. And that's for the lack of problematization. Problematization must be done from the perspective of the community that will be impacted by the design project. That's why I call it an inside-out process instead of an outside-in.
Okay. Anyone else want to jump in or offer any thoughts or ideas on what Fred has been? Gloria, then I'll come to John.
Now we have lots.
Now everyone wants to jump in. I listened to Fred expanding his presentation, and I just keep thinking about one student of mine back in Colombia who did her master's degree in a public school in Manizales, Caldas. Public schools in Colombia are for a low SES, socioeconomic. And I remember my student bringing her rapid functional prototypes to teach children timetables, very excited with what she was doing, and completely crushed by the social situation of children and teachers in those environments. There were children who haven't had breakfast. So my student was in crisis. In Denmark, which is completely opposite place, I had students collaborating with industry in projects, very excited, developing the rapid functional prototypes to work with the people they were supposed to be designing for, doing internships in companies, and being crushed by the company ignoring what the data was saying about the people. So there is something there in design education that is not working. And many times I just had to tell my students, take notes, keep the notes. We cannot use it for your master's because it's not answering the question for your research project so you can graduate, but keep the notes. You will be able to use that later, perhaps some other way. Most of them, of course, left many of those teachings out because it was not part of what they needed to do in order to graduate and get a job. I mean, most of the students do a master's degree because they, need to get ahead. So I'm giving you two examples, one from the Global South, one from the Global North. I am the teacher in both, and both design students are suffering an anxiety. They are feeling different forces. The societal forces, yeah, the needs of the user community, let's call it like that for the moment. Please let's not debate that today. But so thank you, Fred, for bringing that up, because that's how my brain was working as I was listening to you. I remember those stories. So yeah,
those do have been in those two different places. They really see there's a kind of abyss, a completely different cultural situation, and but bridging the gap between those two different contexts might be the way forward for the futures of design education. And I would say that even for students, it might be also interesting for them as well to engage into the different communities with different situations that are in Global North, Global South, because Global North and Global South is not exactly the same as the geographic Global North and South. It's more like you could have in the same city, Global North and Global South. Those just epistemic differences. Global North is the predominant hegemonic views of the world, and the Global South are more like people that have been historically underrepresented or didn't have a voice. So if you engage people with this, students, design students with these different communities, they would definitely be much more pairing with the world, because even in industry and in the capitalist markets, they have to design somehow with or for people in the Global North, or for and with people in the Global South. And make design students feel like they are being affected by the communities. I think it's essential for design education. Sometimes we do the opposite. So we prepare students for going to these communities full of strength and overconfidence, and they don't display any fragility, and they feel like superheroes, but they are not. And that conflict might generate these kind of situations that they feel like either design doesn't work. It's not like we learned, either there's something in the world that we can't do anything about. So they get paralyzed. And I think that's not a good feeling.
Yeah, and thank you for those two examples, Gloria. They're quite powerful examples. Yeah. Okay, John, I think you had your hand up.
Thanks, Derek. Yeah, it was just reiterating, really. I think that polarity is a perfect example, isn't it? It's a perfect example. And when you said, what do we do with students? Because we say we messed up, but you can't, we can't let you mess up. From my point of view, it's engaging students in both those polarities, and that's really bloody hard. But that's part of our job, isn't it? Because if they start to actually engage and see that extreme, that's when the real learning happens, and that's when they begin to understand the bigger, broader context, and that's where the connections, north-south connections, make sense. I think, for me anyway. Yeah.
No, definitely. Sorry, on you go, Fred. Yeah.
I would like to say that providing opportunities for dialogue is also an interesting but very dangerous thing for trying to get people from Global North and Global South to join with a meaningful discussion, and especially creating something together is needed. However, it's hard, and it requires a lot of mediational and facilitation, complicational skills that we don't usually associate with design skills. However, I believe with this pluriversal vision of the futures of design education, this might really become more relevant.
Yep. It exposes us totally. You know, us. It exposes our systems and our ways of thinking and doing totally. Definitely. And that's really dangerous. And for some people, for many people, that's really uncomfortable. But I guess if we're looking at design futures, then those are the things we have to confront.
No, completely good. This came up at the last discussion that we had when we were touching on particularly hegemonic visions, if you like, of design, or global visions of design. It's that the colonizers themselves are auto-colonized, and you don't realize just how you've actually reappropriated your own belief systems within your own structures of thinking. And you end up having no new thoughts whatsoever, and all you're doing is living this kind of like fantasy of dreams. I wanted to maybe touch back just quickly, Fred, on this notion of because again, this is something that we've been obsessed with, I think, for a wee while at the Open University in the UK. And again, I still have this nagging feeling at the back of my head that we're missing this wonderful opportunity to constitute completely different kinds of studio, because we've been forced into a context of different connections. And I still wonder whether or not there might be some value in that idea of thinking what might an alternative studio be if we were to make these different kinds of connections. Have you got any vision of that, or any ideas that you're working on just now, Fred, with that?
Well, apart from beyond what I have already presented, I would say that online Global South, Global North cooperation studios, I've been seeing some of them rising over here. For example, while I was studying in the Netherlands, there was a project for students from India collaborating with students in the Netherlands. However, this was only set up from a technological standpoint and minding only this kind of shift hour differences, but without really discussing well enough cultural difference, and especially cultural encounters. So what happens, the usual, the Dutch guys, they said, well, these India guys, they don't want to work, they are so disorganized, let us do all the job for them. That's not a really good cultural encounter. So it really increases the kind of prejudice we already have. So that's why I told you it's dangerous, and you have really to be mindful of cultural differences. Leslie, do you want to add some on this?
Yeah, I did a studio where we flipped the studio completely. We worked at Stanford, and we worked with students in Trinidad, and we gave all of the power. The students at Stanford didn't know this, but we planned the studio like this, where the students in Trinidad had the power and the students at Stanford did not. And we then had the students in Trinidad diagnose the problem of the students at Stanford. And then we just kind of made the class about reflection. We didn't actually get to design, but we made the class, it was an anthropology class in design. And then we documented all of the student reflection at the end of it to see if there was any kind of significant learning. And it was just interesting. Actually, we didn't get the kind, because we didn't spend enough time in Trinidad. So we ended up with the same problem, right? We didn't spend enough time in Trinidad. So we didn't see the leap in learning with the students in Trinidad, but we saw like a whole flip of a switch with the students at Stanford, where they talked about how uncomfortable they were in being diagnosed and how they felt that that would affect the work that they did in the future. So I mean, just sharing that.
Yeah, this kind of repertory relationships, it's really important, because if you just put them on an equal basis, the hegemonic relationship will prevail. It's just, we have to to do some repertory relationships where people that have been historically underprivileged, they really get some temporary, at least, for reflection privilege, and then they can, after experience the other side, then can join in an equal level of discussion. But this is not, should not be taken for granted. It's very difficult to happen.
Definitely, and that goes to the heart of the.
Very,
sorry.
Sorry, I would like to add something else. So yeah, the team relationships, and the pride. But I was also thinking the tools we use, many of them lately, due to human-centered design, we use ethnographic methods and ethnographic tools. And I feel that in many occasions, and I hope I'm not going to offend anyone because I use them myself. I feel like we don't get in depth enough to interpret the cultures that we enter. I think that our curriculums in design education have to probably help. No, certainly no, probably no. It's paramount that we teach our students to be careful with those methods. I wish I had been taught when I was going through my training, because the thing is that that's the reason why when one is applying rapid ethnographic methods, whether you are doing it rapidly or in a long period of time, things are happening to the person who is doing the ethnography. They are going through situations, and we don't teach our students how to handle the information that is coming in. We have some tools to orient, to get an output, but we don't have tools for us as designers living the process to understand this what's going on. So projects like the one that Leslie just mentioned, I guess that those students from Stanford and Trinidad, probably in their minds and in their bodies, they were feeling a lot of things. And this is emotion, and we talk about emotional design a lot. And so I feel like we are on the right path. I think we are doing the right, but the depth, we need more depth.
Mm-hmm. Yep, I think that's a very good point. I'm going to bring this part to a close just now. I think this is yet another discussion. I think this is for my fellow sort of PedSIG conveners. This is another discussion that we need to carry on somewhere else somehow, because there's so much to talk about here. There's a lot of depth actually to some of the points that have been made as well, particularly in that last point, in terms of superficial versus deep sort of learning mechanisms. And again, I know that we are particularly weak at that in a lot of different design curricula that we have. But first of all, I just wanted to thank Fred so much for that. That was really interesting. Thank you so much. Was there any final thoughts you wanted?
There was a really interesting dialogue.
No, definitely. We'll need to continue it. As I say, I'd like to move to Nicos just now. I'm conscious of the time, so my apologies. And also the other thing we're going to do is, from the previous two speakers and the speakers today, we're collecting a question from everybody that should be posed to anybody thinking about a future of design education or futures of design education. And I think these questions can be quite powerful sometimes, particularly if you've never come across them or you've never been exposed to them. So we'll need to post those somewhere as well. But anyway, I'd like to now quickly introduce, so thank you once again, Fred. Thank you so much for that, really interesting. I'd like to introduce Nicos. Nicos, are you still at the Cyprus University of Technology?
Yes, that's correct.
Nicos, were you the founder of the Art and Design eLearning Lab, or?
Yes, we started that about 9 or 10 years ago with a predominant emphasis on technology-enhanced learning in art and design. But the last 4 or 5 years, we made a switch because we've added new members to our team. So we made a switch to social design, design for social change. So the work we do the last 4 or 5 years has a lot to do with the education of the social designer, if you like, in higher education. So we moved into that area. We haven't abandoned technology-enhanced learning in art and design. We keep that as a parallel interest, and wherever possible, we marry the two. But predominantly the work we produced the last 4 years, research work, and some funded European projects too, 2 of them, if I remember well, they have to do with social design and social change in higher education always, or with adult education. And so if I can start with my Is that all right? I can start with my presentation.
Yeah, go for it. Absolutely, Nicos. Yeah, I'll put a link up to Nicos's site, the Art Design eLearning Lab, in the text.
Can I share the screen?
Go for it. Yes.
Okay. Now let's share. Now, this is based on a paper that I've written a while ago. I'll give you the link later. Now let's see if this thing works. Oh, okay, it does work. Now I've changed the title of the paper to call it "Tell Me How You Teach Design. I'll tell you if you can teach social design." I try to be a bit provocative. All know about IDEO, I assume, and we know about numerous organizations that engage with social design and social design issues, but perhaps some of you may not have heard of Victoria Lab, the first one I have here in the presentation. I strongly recommend that you look at that. They're absolutely brilliant. They're based in Peru, and talking about the North-South divide, this is a fascinating organization within that divide, clearly functioning. Victoria Lab in Peru. One of my favorites. I love to follow the work they do with social design. So I strongly recommend that if you're into social design, you look at that one. This is introductory stuff. Well, I'll bring you down to my main argument here. Now we know about the gradual transition from a narrow focus of design concerned mostly with communication and consumerism towards a more wider, more complex social and human-centered agenda. I mean, that's well documented. And we also know that now researchers have actually mapped out that transition. I'm using two examples only here. Buchanan, one of the first generation of symbolic values and outputs, all the way to second generation, third, and fourth generation, where we are now. Although the book was written, Buchanan articulated this in 2001. So I was wondering if we have even moved into a fifth generation these days, especially with a pandemic around. But nevertheless, we know of that transition where design has actually moved on to deal with different outputs and more complex systems and environments. We also know that social design is an umbrella term in effect. What you see here is my students on the right-hand side working. These are my fourth-year students working on social design projects where I run a multidisciplinary, cross-disciplinary, cross-departmental unit on social design, and I get my students to work in multidisciplinary teams and tackle a social issue. Fascinating. I've been doing this for the last 3 years and I learned a lot from them. But nevertheless, the umbrella term that covers a wide range of activities, also known as public interest design, social impact design, social responsive design, even humanitarian design, lots of names there. And we know also about the nature of the challenges. They're open-ended, not well-defined, no right or wrong solutions, often referred to as wicked problems. But what all these approaches have, all these umbrella terms, if you like, have, is that they entail, to some degree at least, participatory approaches to researching and generating and delivering outputs. To some extent, they all entail some level of participation, some level of co-design. And we use various strategies, as you often know, and somebody before mentioned ethnography. We also use design thinking, we use action research, we use participatory action research, and so on and so forth. We have different strategies of dealing with these social design issues. These are probably the most common, but I'm sure there are more than that. Let's look at these three. Let's see what they share. The first one, design thinking, integration of various types of knowledge, user empathy, testing, evaluating. And I'm only putting these points very briefly here. Action research, diagnosis, action, reflection, and again, depending on how many circles of action research one wants to pursue. Ethnography, of course, I mean, it's all about empathy and deep understanding and the subtlety of people's lives. But when we look at the competencies and the skills that we want from our learners, some of them, the list must include some of these: ability to collaborate, to observe interrelationships, to practice empathy, to analyze diverse information, adaptability, flexibility, and certainly a persistent attitude towards lifelong learning. It never ends. However, often in design, and this is a real photo, by the way, bottom right-hand side, that's a real photo. This is an academic teaching to first-year students how to sketch something anyway. And you see, this is what I call the master-apprentice model. This is the mimetic learning, focusing on the master's practice. The teacher just goes around and checks how each individual student is performing effectively. They don't learn from each other. This is a real photo. I took it about, what was that, 4 weeks ago, 5 weeks ago? I find it quite shocking, to be honest, that we can still teach design like this. We also know about the crit. Now, a lot has been written about the crit, and there has been some criticism and critique of the crit, and one can find those. There's even notions of the democratic crit, but where the dominant view of the crit is that of where the teacher prevails, often without challenge or discussion, then we're certainly dealing with teacher-centered pedagogies here. Other characteristic of teacher-centered pedagogies is the presence of what we call subjectivist epistemologies, and an emphasis on design concerned with personal expression. I mean, I still have colleagues that say to me, I assessed the student's work and I didn't like it. Well, I don't know to what extent those kind of subjectivist epistemologies are helpful, but they're certainly teacher-centered pedagogies. Now, the point I'm trying to make here is that wherever there is an emphasis on individualism, this is in complete antithesis with any notions of empathy, with the ability to develop deep user understanding, with the ability to place oneself into someone else's condition, with the ability to adapt other viewpoints. And so, here I'm going to quote Muratovsky, who's written a beautiful, nice, and some of you might know him, research methods specifically for design education. And I lifted the quote from him because I think it's very appropriate to my presentation. Teacher-centered learning experiences are responsible for design students exhibiting an aversion of or incapability to deal with the content of other disciplines outside of their core practice. Very, very applicable to what I experience. So my main argument, I'm getting very close to the end now. My main argument is this: where there is over-reliance on teacher-centered instructional strategies, there is a corresponding inability, these two are directly related, to foster the competencies needed to practice design related to strategies that are human-centered. And you can find my article here. I will post the link. I'm getting very close to the point. Sorry, I'll just post the link in the chat if you want to read all of it later. Let me see, how do I get back to Skype now? No, I'm not in Skype, I'm in Zoom. Now let me see. How do I get, where's the chat here? There's the chat. And let me just post the link there so you can, if you are interested to read all of the paper. Yeah, so let me just wrap up my point. I have a question for you. And the question is this: what instructional approaches, because I'm also working at mapping the competencies needed and the skills needed to educate in higher education the social designer. Now, these four are absolutely essential. There are others, of course, but these four are absolutely essential: empathy, self-efficacy, lifelong learning mindset, and emotional intelligence. So what I've done for the rest of this discussion, but you can go later if you want as well, I'm going to get the link to the Google document where I'm asking you, if you want, like it, you can do it now or you can do it later. How would you approach, from an instructional approach, trying to promote and foster these skills: empathy, self-efficacy, lifelong learning mindset, and emotional intelligence? Bullet points would do, you know, and that would help me also with my future research in this area, because I'm also trying to develop what I would call a benchmark statement for social design. And this is where I think I finished. Now, if I can just put this link in the chat, and those of you that feel comfortable to share your views of how we can foster these particular skills: empathy, so important; self-efficacy, absolutely critical for social design; a lifelong learning mindset, impossible to live without this; and certainly emotional intelligence. And my friend, here I finished my presentation. Thank you.
Cool. Thank you very much, Nicos. That was really interesting. I like this inflection on teacher-centered pedagogies. I mean, I've come across literature on this before, but not put so succinctly. And I think that definitely has been something that has emerged over the last year or during the pandemic, is that challenge to teacher-centered pedagogy, or the spotlight that it's shown on certain practices. I won't name names, and I won't be specific about those. I'm sure we've all come across them or maybe seen them. So, Nicos, did you want to direct a conversation a little bit more focused if you're wanting to get something specifically round about that Google Doc, or are you happy for a more open discussion?
I'm happy for a more open discussion. I mean, I have certainly learned from the discussion before from Frederick, and I've written some notes down that I didn't want to interrupt before. And I have certainly learned from this previous session that we had with the previous paper. I'm just quickly going to read the 3 notes I wrote down from the previous presentation. World becomes a design studio. Wow, I love that. Empower others to engage with design, empower others to engage, and others is wide open, the others. And egalitarian notions of design, love it, absolutely love it, egalitarian notions of design. But specifically for my presentation, I don't know if I shared that Google link. Let me just try to share this again.
Yeah, the Google link is there. Yep,
and people have got in. Excellent, excellent. Thank you. Because I'm dealing with social design in higher education, and because I'm teaching it the last 3 years, I'm trying to map out, and the number of papers I wrote in recent times all relate to this, to social design in higher education. I'm absolutely interested, it's my latest obsession, of how to foster those skills and competencies that would allow students to become effective social designers. And that's my focus. So I have identified 4 points. They are not the only ones, of course, that are among the the hardest ones. I mean, how would you go about cultivating, fostering with your students, not only in a social design class, in other classes as well? I would assume to some extent product design might relate to this as well. Things like empathy, self-efficacy, emotional intelligence. I mean, how would you go about cultivating emotional intelligence? I know that self-efficacy has a lot to do with how one is brought up and how one grows up, and how the family and society plays a role in all of that. But we as teachers, what can we do in the classroom to promote self-efficacy? So this is my notion, this is my interest.
Or is there perhaps even a prior question to that? I mean, even some of these terms, I might even ask, what do we mean by these? I know certainly, well, I'm just reading again Farias and Wilkie's studio studies book, looking at STS methods, looking at professional studios, and how particularly empathy, sympathy, and the client are all invoked intending to mean empathy and sympathy, but in actual fact, it's basically a co-option of the word client, as if you are representing their needs, when in actual fact, you're representing maybe the practice's needs or your own designerly intentions. So the co-option of these terms is very, very, very common in design, both design education and design practice, I find, personally speaking. And as we've found out from Fred's talk, the difficulty in actually going beneath the surface to get to what real empathy might be is non-trivial. Anyway, does anybody else want to jump in, maybe ask questions of Nicos, of his presentation, or any observations just now?
Let me see if I can upload the presentation. But more important than the presentation itself is you could read the paper where I have articulated these things more extensively, obviously, in the paper, where I make the connection that there can possibly be no connection between teacher-centered pedagogies and social design. The two cannot possibly connect. One nullifies the other, in my view.
Gloria, go for it.
Nicos, thank you for your presentation. Very insightful. And I have a comment on the instructional approaches that you can foster, especially in the one around empathy. That one is already fostered through the ethnographic approaches and the design thinking approaches, because the students are engaging with user communities, with people in their places. So empathy starts developing there. But empathy has to stay in the design process, because, well, like I said, with the example with my students, they empathize so much that they get overwhelmed, but sometimes they cannot even address it through the design project, and because A, B, C, or D, and then perhaps sometimes the output doesn't represent the empathy in the process. So perhaps that's the one that I would like to contribute. And emotional intelligence, I am sure that is also part of that as well. So perhaps I would recommend to have a look at the literature in education, because all these 4 concepts I have come across a lot. I design educational technology, and these are concepts in the area of education. So perhaps look for those there. Self-efficacy, are you reading Bandura? Who are you reading in the area of self-efficacy?
Of course,
Yeah.
of course.
Yes,
That's who you read. There is no doubt about it. There is no doubt about it that there is an extensive literature in all these things, like self-efficacy, empathy, of course, and ethnography, naturally, and lifelong learning, of course. Now, but I would ask you to try to somehow narrow it down as much as possible to an instructional approach. There you go. You're walking in the class. You have 10, 15.
So now you need curriculum design and work with someone who knows how to do that. Some colleagues.
Yes.
Okay. I think maybe
the
rather
discussion is what instructional approaches would you find ideal to promote these things? That's the question. You know,
but you are already teaching it.
Okay.
You are already teaching it.
I think maybe there's a couple of ways we could maybe approach this discussion. If we're looking at it operationally and in an instructional sense, yep, we could definitely do that. But again, if we're constructing something, or if we're looking at this, I mean, I'd maybe pull it back again to that notion of the contradiction that Nicos is identifying here, that there's an exclusion here between teacher-centered pedagogies and teaching these forms of design or approaching these forms of pedagogy. And I wonder if we could maybe focus on that and leave maybe the specific examples a little bit. Or Leslie Ann, did you want to jump in with a specific one?
Yeah, so now I'm in this area of social design as well. And I've been like struggling with a couple of things. One, I find that the way that I've been expected to teach social design doesn't include crit. And I've been trying to see, well, okay, how can I somehow create an empathetic critique space? You know, and been trying to, so like I've never really done that kind of critique where where the professor destroys the students. You know, I know that people do that, and I've never been a part of that. But you know, it's like finally now that I'm in the social design space, where I teach students who are not design students, that I'm seeing that it's missing, you know, and trying to say, well, okay, how do we create it? And then how do we make it a critique that is really not teacher-centered? So that's one thing. And then the other thing I wanted to share is another unusual empathy strategy. I brought in a filmmaker once to my class. And when she started to interview the students about the people that they were working with, the students had done empathy interviews, and the filmmaker started to interview the students about their interviews. And the filmmaker was able to make clear the empathy gap, because she said, you know, she was showing that you can't even convince me, you know, like you as a student, you've done these interviews and you haven't done, your interview isn't deep enough for me to be able to understand the story. And so after she asked them all of these questions, they went back out and they did better interviews. There's still the interview gap, the empathy gap, because the students are young and inexperienced and don't know how to connect with difference. But I found that using those filmmaking strategies and storytelling strategies, I found it just brought a little bit more empathy into the class. So comments or questions?
Well, the learning mechanism there is very, well, I suppose it is kind of closely related to design in the sense that it is experiential. Again, it's this question of how do you de-center a teaching-centered pedagogy in order that a student can learn rather than a teacher teach. And again, that's a constant challenge, and it seems to be that's a nice example, Leslie Ann, of almost that reflective mode, if you like, of experiential learning. I don't know, it seemed that way. So maybe, Nicos, maybe it's not necessarily instructional moves necessarily, or I suppose you could describe it as instructional moves, but it's maybe particular modes, if you like, of instructional move. So the reflective mode, that's definitely a class of instructional moves that are designed to allow learning rather than, focus on teaching. John, did you want to jump in?
Thanks, Derek. Yeah, I guess the other thing I was thinking about when you were just talking was, I think it's linked, certainly with my experience as students, it is linked to the value that they place on the tutor's point of view. So, it almost like rolling back from that situation that we find ourselves in as tutors, that situation is already loaded with expectations of what the relationship is going to be, isn't it? So the students come into that situation going, well, we don't, you tell us, we learn. And often students within design, we do try and break that down, but there comes a point where, if I've found that if we take part in the journey that the students are on too much, if we talk about ourselves as the explorers alongside them and with them, that's one way of kind of leveling some hierarchy. But in many ways, and maybe this is going back to the north-south thing, but there is an expectation that there is a hierarchy there and that there is some level of deference there. And I think that all that baggage that we go into those situations with, and the students come into the situations with, kind of restrict our ability to kind of shift and to shape that in a different way sometimes.
I wonder, could we maybe bring in Samangi? My apologies if I'm mispronouncing your name. Did you want to talk to it was a really interesting point that you're making in the text there. And particularly I'm picking up on the word on authenticity, that maybe if you're more tutor-centered, you maybe lose a certain amount of authenticity. That was interesting. Would you be happy to talk to that?
Yeah, okay. Samangi is my name, so you spelled it correct. Thank you. So yeah, so since I'm from Sri Lanka, most of the design, when I was a student, what I felt was like, when it comes to crits, even though you come up with a design by your own self, like you have researched it, you have empathized, you have done everything, but when it comes to evaluations, some students, they know how the evaluator thinks and their preferences and all. So most of the students are like trying to trick based on their the evaluator's preferences, and by that they score more because the evaluators get tricked. Because of that, most of the students, majority of the students lose themselves because they run behind the marks and things like that. Because of that, they lose their authenticity when it comes to creations. So I feel like cultivating self-actualization. So the student will definitely know what are their capabilities and what their competencies are, and then where they should improve themselves. By doing that, I think we can bring in authentic creators, which should be the aim of design educators, right? So yeah, so in terms of that, I have hypothesized that cultivating self-actualization would be one of the major things that could enkindle empathy and emotional intelligence, and as well as authenticity when it comes to developing creativity, the authentic, how can I say, the genuine creativity of design students, so that they can become emergent creative people in the future. So yeah, I want to have your opinion on that. Thank you.
Yep, Nicos, do you want to respond to that? And then we'll maybe come to, if it's okay, Hadas, would it be okay to maybe touch on your point after that?
Sure.
I'm not sure if in design education, okay, this is a generalization, so I'm going to speak it with all the precautions that come with generalizations. Okay. But I'm not sure. Certainly, I very rarely encountered in my 25 years of experience in design education, a very good balance between where the students need to go as far as how much they need to lose for themselves to learn something new, and whether the teacher is prepared to let go of her hegemonic role, if you like, in the class. And that balance, I have very rarely seen it where one strikes it exactly, you know. And so I don't have an answer to that. But certainly there needs to be, it would be good to have that awareness that this is something we're seeking. And indeed, however, I have seen exactly what Samangi is saying, that students know the formalities of the crit. And they know that if they stand up and speak the right things the way that hegemonic role in the classroom is expecting to hear it, he or she will get a good grade. Now that's a fact of life, and no good denying that. Now that's my only answer to Samangi. I'm really sorry, obviously I don't have the answer.
Okay, again, this is definitely another theme that's going to probably keep coming back. I wanted to maybe just bring in Hadas very quickly, because this might be an instructional move, particularly with the shift that we've maybe seen over the last 9 months. Again, differences between proximate situations and maybe virtual or distance situations. Hadas, did you want to talk about that?
Yeah, sorry, I just had a little interruption here.
Well, okay. I just wondered if you wanted to make a comment on or talk to your comment in the chat about noticing a difference in.
Well, I wanted to relate a little bit to about authenticity and a computer-supported learning environment.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Well, from my experience, I especially this semester, I'm using a multi-user virtual environment to teach design, and I made the students to work in groups. So I actually compromised on their personal grades, since they will get a group grade. It's groups of 5, but what we did earn is the ability to unfold the teacher-centered structure, since they just need to explore the environment themselves as in their design eyes, and if the group is not there, so they cannot use it, since they cannot experience it as a multi-user environment.
Okay, so it's basically it's the conditions within which you set up, so it's necessary that it's a flattening, if you like, of the normal sort of hierarchy. Okay, that's interesting.
This is in terms of authenticity, and also in terms of social, I guess, social factors, since they have to see other users in their environment in order to design.
Okay, cool. Thank you, Hadas. Tash, did you have a question? Is Tash still here?
She had to leave, I think.
Oh, did she? Oh, whoops, my fault. Sorry. Okay, I'm conscious of the fact that we're a little bit late. We're running a little bit late. Did anybody have any sort of final comments or questions for Nicos? Again, I know that there's a lot more stuff that's coming out of here. We need to find maybe better ways of continuing these dialogues in different spaces. Fred, I can't not come to you and offer you the last question here. Go for it.
Maybe that question might be not easily answered, but I have taught some socially oriented design in different schools, and I've noticed that it's more like a curriculum thing. The students who had previous classes on anthropology, sociology, communication theories, they perform much better when they go to communities and they try to understand what's going on there. But then these humanities content is typically taught in a much more teacher-centered design approach that in comparison to design studio, it's much more centric and less active. However, they do perform better while they are really doing social design. Maybe they don't perform well for other kinds of designs, but I see a huge difference. If students, they just have a social design studio, we know sociological, anthropological, psychological, whatever, humanities theory, they just don't see anything. They just go to the community and don't figure out that this is is still relevant for design. So how do you, what are your thoughts on this, Nicos? I'm really curious.
You've made a very good point, Frederick, indeed. And I don't want to talk too specific about the culture I work with in. I'm not from Cyprus myself, but I have to say I realize it's an extension to your point, and a point I'll take. I have to say that I realize that the students of mine that once a week pick up a newspaper or go online, read the news, or have some awareness of what's happening beyond the social media account are likely to be the ones that will engage better with social design. That's a fact of life. Now, if you can cultivate that, through some kind of humanities background, as you correctly said, sociology, whatever, history, whatever, you're giving them a context, you're giving them a basis to extend. Yes, I agree with you. Absolutely right. Totally right. I have students walk into a social design class and they wouldn't have a clue who the Prime Minister of the country is. And that's a fact of life. They wouldn't have a clue. It's true, absolutely true what you're saying. And that's also part of the challenge. It reminded me of a time when I used to work in the Middle East, and I said to my students, do you know what a book looks like? And they said they had no idea what a book looks like. This is true story, okay? And I had to take them to the library to show them what a book looks like. I know it's so simplified. Context, historical, social context to develop design for both of these discussions that we're having, the one earlier with Frederick and the one I'm saying now, I agree. We need that background. It's a challenge, certainly. Yeah.
But does that not then take us so far out of the sphere of design education in some ways? I mean, this goes right to the heart of, you could almost quote the Game of Thrones philosophy on this. I won't repeat it verbatim because it's very rude. There's just no cure for being a, the way that people are constructed is complex and multivariate. We stand at best a chance of modifying that in some ways. A, is it our responsibility to do that? B, who gives us the authority and agency to say what is and what isn't right in doing so? I mean, we rarely touch on the fact that we are responsible for changing, quite literally, the minds of the people who are in our charge, if you want to think of it that way, but we don't necessarily take on the ethical obligation that goes with that. So are we moving too far from design education as a thing here? And again, who sets the agenda for this? Or is there a way that somehow, miraculously, we can find, as Samangi has said, some kind of space in the middle where out of this emerges an authenticity that is co-constructed or maybe a bit more emergent? I don't know. That's maybe a big question to end on. So if you could think about that as homework. Okay, I'm going to maybe wrap it up with that because I'm conscious of the fact we're now getting quite late. I'm happy to keep the conversation going as well if anybody does want to do that. But did anybody want to have a final comment or a final thought, or a quick one, obviously?
Not quick. I'm going to jump in and kind of
do it anyway. Go for it.
Yeah, emphasize that we are, education is for learning, or education is for life. And so the people who we are preparing for life will do better. So some of us get caught up. I'm going to step away from that group with, all of the technical things in design. And I keep thinking that some of this stuff is actually not so important. The technical stuff is going to change, but are we preparing people for life? And the people who we're preparing for life will be good designers. If we come back to what like Fred just said and what Nicos just said, so it's like if we're giving people that kind of, somehow within the curriculum, we're giving them that strong base in humanities, in democracy, in that kind of critical awareness, then they're going to be good designers. Fingers crossed.
Excellent. Let's end on that. That wonderful piece of optimistic idealism. And I mean that in a positive way. I wonder whether the inverse is still possible, though, Leslie Ann. It's almost a kind of, if, say, for example, in teaching architecture or in watching young apprentice architects learn, that through almost like the process or the craft of architecture, or maybe, I don't know, maybe you could extend it to learning and interface design, that you become more human through that practice. That it could work both ways would be absolutely wonderful, or you would hope that it could be. Anyway, sorry, I'm going to not talk anymore. Thank you very much, everybody, for that. And thank you particularly to Fred and to Nicos, two really good provocations and interesting subjects. I'm very conscious of the fact as well, though, that there are a lot of not unanswered, because it's not our place to give answers, and that's not what the point of these discussions has always been, but there's maybe threads of conversation that are really valuable to keep going. So if anybody has any suggestions on how we might actually pick out particular conversations, we are more than happy to support hosting of either focused conversations or more focused workshops or explorations, or even curriculum design. Open to any kind of suggestions on this as a group. So please get in touch with us if there's any ideas. As I say, the next futures discussion is penciled in. Still have to confirm it with team members. Haven't even told them yet. I'm really bad at calendar stuff. 14th of January. And as I say, we've got Kenelwe Munyai from South Africa. We'll be talking about design thinking in a contextualized South African context. And hopefully Liv Marit Nielsen and Ingvild de Granis talking about early years design education. Very similar to some of the topics that we've been talking about today, the development of self, of an individual in society. So if you can join us then, that'll be absolutely great. Please feel free to get in touch with us in the meantime. Let us know what you think about things. And thank you very much for your contribution, everybody, and all the very best wherever you are.